Welcome back again for another North Carolina final exam review. Today we're going to be looking at the conservative era in modern America, which appeared from about 1968 with the election of Nixon to present day when President Obama became president. As you watch the video, answer the guided questions provided. You may need to pause or rewatch the video in order to answer the guided questions. When the video ends, summarize in paragraph form the main points of the video. Make sure that you use the specific vocabulary given to you on your WSQ sheet. These are going to appear as bolded and underlined words during the video. Finish by asking one question. This question can be something that you're still confused about, a discussion question, or a general question about the content. The essential questions that we're going to look at during this video are: what were the characteristics of a conservative president? And then how did modern day events affect American history? In the election of 1968, the Democratic Party had been deeply divided over the Vietnam War. They're divided between Vice President Hubert Humphrey and Senator Eugene McCarthy. Humphrey won the Democratic nomination, but anti-war demonstrators at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago had forced Humphrey to lead a pretty badly divided party into the election over the issue of the Vietnam War. George Wallace was the former governor of Alabama. He was a longtime champion of segregation and states' rights. You may recognize him from the movie Selma. He ran as candidate for the American Independent Party, appealing to Americans who were upset by the violence and civil rights movement. He won 5 states in the South and little support in the North. The turmoil within the Democratic Party benefited former Vice President Richard Nixon, who ran on the Republican ticket. Nixon campaigned and won on a promise to restore law and order. He appealed to many middle-class Americans who were fed up with the years of riots and protests. He called these the silent majority. There was 2 groups going into the election of 1968, the Doves and the Hawks. The Doves opposed the Vietnam War, staged massive protests, and demanded immediate truth withdrawals. The Hawks supported the Vietnam War and believed that withdrawing troops would be the same as surrendering. The silent majority was the name given by President Nixon to the moderate mainstream Americans who quietly supported his Vietnam War policies. Members of the silent majority believed that the United States was indeed justified in supporting South Vietnam. The silent majority mainly advocated for gradual withdrawal. Nixon slowly began to withdraw troops from Vietnam and replace them with newly trained South Vietnamese troops. This withdrawal became known as Vietnamization. Nixon promised to preserve the United States' goals abroad and bring peace with honor. Despite his promise to remove troops, Nixon gave the order to invade Cambodia and bomb Cambodia and ordered American forces to join the South Vietnamese army in fighting the Viet Cong, the allies of the Viet Minh, led by Ho Chi Minh. Nixon supported the action, saying that it was necessary to protect American forces and Vietnamization. Stunned by the invasion, college students across the nation erupted in protest. At a college protest at Kent State University, the National Guard was called in, and they fired into a large crowd of protesters, killing 4 students and wounding 9. In the picture on the right, you see one of the most famous pictures out of this era of a woman grieving after one of her classmates was shot. Henry Kissinger was President Nixon's national security advisor and the top negotiator in Vietnam. He had engaged in a series of secret negotiations with the North Vietnamese aimed at reaching a negotiated settlement with the Viet Minh. United States and the North Vietnamese finally reached an armistice, and they signed the Paris Accords. In the Paris Accords, the United States agreed to withdraw the last of its troops in exchange for the release of 500 prisoners of war. Domestically, the United States could not afford both Johnson's war on poverty and the Vietnam War. The combination of spending on the war and the expensive social programs produced high inflation rates in the 1960s and 1970s. Inflation made the value of a dollar less and drove the price of goods up. The Vietnam War increased public skepticism toward international involvement and also towards their domestic president. In 1973, Congress passed the War Powers Act that countered the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. The War Powers Act required that the President inform Congress within 48 hours if U.S. forces are sent into a hostile area without a declaration of war. The United States and the Communist World had been locked in a Cold War since the end of World War II. The United States and the Soviet Union had experienced a series of tense Cold War confrontations that included the Erland Berlift, the construction of the Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis as well. The United States still had not recognized the communist Chinese government. Nixon tried a new policy called détente. Détente called for a relaxation of tensions between the United States and the communist world. In late 1971, Nixon stunned the nation and the world by announcing that he intended to visit China. Just 3 months after becoming the first president to visit China, Nixon became the first American president to visit Moscow. Following his visit to Moscow, they were able to come up with a series of agreements between the United States and Communist Russia. The SALT treaties are the agreement. The Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty, otherwise known as SALT, limited the numbers of missiles that each side could have in its arsenal, meaning that they limited the stockpiles that each country had. An additional series of agreements expanded trade between the two superpowers. The Great Society programs had led to a dramatic increase in federal influence and federal spending, but Nixon wanted to decrease the size and the influence of the federal government. Known as New Federalism, Nixon's plan called for a distributing of a portion of federal power to state and local governments. Under a program called revenue sharing, state and local governments could spend their federal dollars however they wished within certain limitations. This is when the Republican Party became known for what it is today. During the 1970s, the American economy experienced both an increasing rate of inflation and a slowing of economic growth. The combination of rising inflation and rising unemployment became known as stagflation. Everything was stagnant. All of the following characterized the economy during the Carter administration: increasing unemployment, increasing inflation, increasing government spending, increasing prices of gasoline due to the 1973 Arab oil embargo and the 1979 revolution in Iran, and increasing interest rates. The following caused the inflationary pressure: spending from the Vietnam War, rising energy costs, and then the soaring federal budget deficit, and also rising healthcare costs. The value of the American dollar was going down, while the price of goods was going up. President Carter emphasized a foreign policy based on human rights. His human rights policy aroused global concerns and helped to make human rights an international issue. He is responsible for the Camp David Accords. In the summer of 1978, Carter invited the leaders of Egypt and Israel, powers that had long been at war with one another, to the presidential retreat in Maryland at Camp David. After 12 days of negotiations, the leaders were able to reach a peace agreement known as the Camp David Accords. Little after that, the Iran hostage crisis played a key role in President Carter's defeat in the 1980 election. Over 50 different hostages had been taken in Iran after the United States allowed the Shah of Iran to come to the United States for cancer treatment. Other factors that hurt Carter included double-digit inflation and the energy crisis. Like Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan capitalized on his status as a Washington outsider. Reagan had been known for his career in Hollywood. The Iranian hostage crisis became one of the main issues in the election of 1980 because Carter was unable to get the hostages back. Right after Reagan was elected president, the hostages were released. There was also problems with the economy and the high rate of inflation. In addition to that, there was many people who were hostile toward big government, and they called for a more conservative Supreme Court. The Republican Party was really getting its foot. President Reagan implemented a series of economic policies known as Reaganomics, or supply-side economics. The key goals of Reaganomics is to reduce federal taxes for businesses and wealthy Americans, but also to reduce corporate taxes. The hope was that this would trickle down to the lower classes. Overall, Reaganomics promoted economic growth by deregulating business. The 1970s witnessed a significant migration of Americans from the Frost Belt in the north to the Sun Belt in the south. The South and the West have experienced the greatest population growth since 1970. In the last 25 years, a significant increase in immigration from Latin America and Asia has also increased American population numbers. In addition, older Americans have threatened the long-term ability of the Social Security system to meet their needs. The United States approved the NAFTA agreement under Clinton. This created a trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico to create free trade between those three countries, allowing for more jobs and more industrialization. The United States also became a member of the World Trade Organization, which created a framework for negotiating and formalizing trade agreements. In November of 2008, a record number of voters elected Barack Obama as the nation's 44th president. He was our first African American president. When you're finished, make sure that you answer the guided questions. If you missed one, watch the video again, pausing where you need to. Once you feel like you have a good understanding of this video, summarize in paragraph form the main points of the video. Make sure that you use the specific vocabulary located on your WSQ sheet. These appeared as bolded and underlined words during the video. Then you can finish by asking one question. This question can be something that you're still confused about, a general question about content, or a discussion question for the class. Thank you for joining me for this North Carolina Final Exam review. We'll see you again soon.